Hey there, folks. This is Misadventure, here today with the 27th developer diary for my Imperator Rome overhaul mod project, Hegemony. This is also going to be the first of a 6-part sub-series within the Dev Diary series, which concerns the upcoming Hegemony beta patch 0.9. Now, if you've been on the Hegemony Discord for a while, you probably are aware of what 0.9 is all about and why I've chosen to cover the content of it in such a segmented way. But I think it'll become clear throughout this video why I'm doing it like this, in order to ensure that 0.9's coverage isn't concentrated into one gigantic video like what happened with 0.8, and because I'm working on the parts of this patch one by one, and they can be shown off once they're finished, as is the case here. Now, 0.9 is the first of several major patches throughout the beta, which concern the full implementation of interesting countries into Hegemony. If you don't remember from me talking about it a long time ago, like in vanilla Imperator Rome or other Imperator Rome mods, there are certain countries which are going to have special content, especially unique missions, to highlight their unique role or special capabilities, or just interesting scenarios involving them in the Peloponnesian War scenario. Now, some of the interesting countries for Hegemony are going to be fairly obvious, like Athenai and Lacedaemon, and they will certainly have quite a bit of content that I'll cover in the future. But 0.9 covers the first country I chose to start with when it comes to implementing an interesting country from the start with no prior scripting experience, which is part of why 0.9 has taken me such a long time to work on, as I've had to teach myself how to do Imperator Rome scripting, basically from having no knowledge about it at all. And the country I chose to start with is Kórkyra. If you don't remember your Peloponnesian War history, Kórkyra is a small island country. In fact, I'll just show you on the map. It's a small island country in the extreme northwest of Hellas, who is a former Corinthian colony and longtime Corinthian adversary. Kórkyra and Corinthos are bitter enemies, and their conflict, here's Kórkyra over here, their conflict essentially led to the Peloponnesian War, and there's a lot more to it than that, but that's the very short explanation. Now, Kórkyra is a Delian democracy. They're in the Delian League, they're an ally of Athenai, not a subject of Athenai, and in fact, the nature of their alliance with Athenai is a major part of their missions. Now, for interesting countries, the way I'm approaching it in Hegemony is that every single interesting country will have 5 starting missions. Each mission is mutually exclusive with all the other missions. They represent essentially different paths you're going down in directing the country in a different direction. Each interesting country will have one of the 5 missions be the historical mission, which roughly gamifies and kind of adapts their historical actions in the real war, in real history. Instead of some ahistorical alternative path, you're going to have 4 other options for each of them. Now, the first mission I have now completely finished for Kórkyra, and will be showing you in full in this video, is their historical mission. And all of the interesting countries, their historical missions are marked as easy difficulty, and Kórkyra's historical mission is, in fact, its easiest mission of the 5 that are planned. There are going to be 3 other missions that you can access normally. They're not in the mod yet, but those are what I'm going to be working on for the next couple videos of the sub-series, that are all ahistorical missions that involve different directions for Kórkyra, and I can talk about that more in those later videos. And then each historical country will also have and also each mission that I mentioned earlier will have a different difficulty. There will be 2 that are medium difficulty, 1 that's hard difficulty, and then the 5th mission for every single interesting country will be a legendary difficulty hidden mission, which is also a starting mission in that you pick it over the other missions, but it has special requirements to access, and you can't start any other mission in order to still get access to it. And the way I'm going to handle presenting information about the hidden missions throughout the developer diaries covering all the beta patches is I'm going to, because I'm segmenting all the mission presentation stuff into 1 mission per video, and this video is just about the historical Kórkyrian mission. Every video about the hidden missions, because I'm denoting for each video what it's about, you can choose to skip over it if you do not want to have it spoiled, because I will, in all these videos, be spoiling active gameplay you do during a campaign. And you could, by the way, choose to skip this video as well if you don't want to spoil Kórkyra's historical mission, and I'll be titling every single video to make it clear what each video is about. But especially with the secret 5th missions, you may not want to learn how you access them because that's actually part of the gameplay. But I am aspiring with this project to be very transparent, so I'd rather showcase how the secret missions work as well and give you, the viewer, the choice to opt into it by choosing to select that specific part of each of these little sub-series about the interesting mission implementation or interesting country implementation beta patches. I hope that all made sense. That was a little convoluted, but that's how Hegemony is a lot of the time. So to sort of recap, this video is just about Kórkyra's easy difficulty historical mission, which is called the Delian West, which I will be showcasing starting now. So let me hop into Kórkyra, and one thing that will immediately become apparent is I've actually created the Peloponnesian War, which shockingly hasn't happened in the mod until now. But yeah, there is now actually a war in this mod about the Peloponnesian War, and it is in fact the Peloponnesian War. So I'm not going to like show each individual participant to prove to you that I caught all of them, but Athenai brings in their entire massive horde of subjects, as well as their allies. You'll see the Thessalians are in here somewhere, and we ourselves are an ally, not a subject of Athenai, and we're in the war too. And Lacedaemon is in this too with all of their allies and their one subject as well. So everyone's here, and this is the entire lore-accurate Peloponnesian War. In fact, just to show you I mean it, here is the alignment map, and here's the diplomacy map, and although red and green are quite similar colors, if you squint closely, you'll notice that everyone who is Peloponnesian aligned is also at war with me right now, because I'm Delian aligned. So that's the Peloponnesian War. Now, if you are a big nerd like me, you're going to say, hold on, Misadventurer, you fake historian. The Peloponnesian War didn't start January 1st of 431. It started in the spring of 431 because of the Theban and Plataean situation with the... I don't have time to explain that, but basically lots of shenanigans with Thebae and Plataea. And one of the things I plan to implement later in the beta is interesting mission content for Thebae, at which time I will implement a more event-based start to the war, which builds off of and is incorporated into Thebae's interesting content. So at the moment, as a kind of provisional measure, the war just starts the moment the game begins, even though I know that historically and later in the mod's development, there will be a slightly more graceful ramp up, which is more accurate. But because the mod starts in 431, most of the ramping up to the war has happened already. It's really been happening since 435. So we're this is going to work fine for now. And at least the war happening at all allows for the scripting of all the missions to make sense, because most of them would expect you to be in the war. So the war is in the mod now, and if I actually just click around to random participants, you can see that they're all at war, and if I click on a Peloponnesian country, it's a different list, but it's all, the same. So you get the idea. And then I clicked, of course, on a neutral country, which, yeah. So the point is the war's in the mod now. But let us get into the main content of this video, which is Kórkyra's historical mission, the Delian West. Difficulty easy, historical, and all of them will have this little label that indicates what their difficulty is and whether they're historical or ahistorical. Our ecclesia faced an impossible choice in 433 BCE. Continue to put our faith in neutrality, even though Corinthos was preparing a full-scale invasion of our island, or approach our polis in Hellas, approach the only polis in Hellas with a navy powerful enough to stop them, Athenai. We made our choice, and years later, we are prepared to honor our alliance and play our part in this war. Athenai's powerful navy is overstretched, and while our own fleet is still being rebuilt after the Battle of Sabota, they have entrusted us with establishing Delian naval supremacy in the western theaters of this war. This will be no easy task. Corinthos has dominated the Ionian Sea for centuries, and will be eager to confront us if we challenge them. To win the Delian West, we must first deprive Corinthos of each and every ally or advantage they currently use to maintain their stranglehold. We will launch campaigns against Ambracia and the other Corinthian colonies in Acarnania, and when the opportunity presents itself, reinforce the western Athenian naval base at Naupactos. We will also ensure the Epirot tribes remain neutral, and if possible, align them to our cause. When the time is right, we will face Corinthos. So, before I reveal, and if you've not been on the Hegemony Discord, you may be caught off guard by what this mission looks like. Before I reveal the mission, let me quickly show you Kórkyra's starting national modifiers, because there's a lot going on. And all of the interesting countries, much like Hearts of Iron 4, will have tons of special national modifiers that the missions interact with. So first of all is just democracy. This is the generic one that all the democracies have. You can just ignore this one. This is just for gameplay purposes. It really starts here with Kórkyrian neutrality. Kórkyra ended centuries of neutrality in 433 BCE when she allied with Athenai and joined the Delian League. This was no easy choice. While her ecclesia felt compelled by the existential threat of a Corinthian invasion, the decision has remained controversial ever since. Though the majority of Kórkyrians favor their city-states' involvement in the Delian League, especially now that they are at war, Kórkyra's heritage of neutrality remains a disruptive political issue. This national modifier, which it says until end of game, it's just permanent until the missions affect it, and all the missions will interact with all of the modifiers. So don't worry, you don't have to do a specific mission to address a specific modifier. They just interact with them in different ways. But the modifiers are what are constant, whatever mission you pick. Kórkyrian neutrality gives a punishing minus 25% policy justification effect, 50% reduced pop realignment speed, and 2.5% levy size multiplier. Moving on, the Corinthian West. Kórkyrian politics are dominated by anxiety and cynicism about the seemingly unstoppable Corinthian navy and its supremacy over the western seas of Hellas. While Kórkyra's new alliance with Athenai and her own redoubled efforts to expand her fleet may inspire some measured confidence, Kórkyra's unresolved vulnerability to another Corinthian invasion attempt limits their military confidence at sea. This gives a minus 5% morale of navies, minus 25% navy morale recovery, and minus 25% Trirese offense. And remember, Trirese are really the only ship type in Hegemony, as historically accurate. There's really no ship size diversity yet. Everyone's just using Trirese, or in Latin, triremes. Next up is Epirot frontier violence. Kórkyra maintains a series of colonies along the northern coastline of Epiros, and though these cities have facilitated trade with and immigration from the Epirot tribes around them, many Epirots remain hostile to Kórkyrian encroachment in their homeland. Though raids and full-scale attacks are infrequent, the fear of this frontier violence is an enduring political issue in Kórkyra, and may hinder efforts to commit her resources to distant conflicts. This provides minus 10% national manpower, plus 10% fort defense, and minus 2.50% levy size multiplier. Next up is Epidamnian embargo, minus 10% national commerce. Epidamnos was Kórkyra's most important colony, but the Epidamnian affair of 436 to 435 BCE, where Kórkyra opposed a democratic independence movement in Epidamnos, caused a breakdown in their relationship. While the two city-states remain at peace, many Epidamnians are unwilling to share the colony's wealth with her founder. Next up is Shattered at Sabota, 50% increased ship recruit speed and plus 10% navy maintenance. After losing most of her powerful navy at the Battle of Sabota against Corinthos in 433 BCE, Kórkyra has been sparing no expense in its rapid reconstruction. The breakout of war across Hellas may leave little time to remain unprotected. Finally is Thrinakian trade, capital import routes plus 3. Thrinakia is a large island west of Hellas, and Kórkyra has always served as a major port between the two regions. Though many of the Hellenic city-states of Thrinakia are friendly to Athenai, the island's most powerful polis, Setakusai, is not, and the volume of Thrinakian trade through Kórkyra in the last few years has been declining. If you didn't catch that, Thrinakia is the ancient Greek name of Sicily. And yes, Sicily is in the mod, just indirectly, because it's not actually in the mod. I have to work around the Bronze Age map here until I develop map modding, or mapping skills for Imperator Rome. So for now, a lot of the Sicilian stuff that is relevant in the war has to be represented abstractly through the missions, through the modifiers and whatnot. So I certainly am trying to include it as I can in the mod. So here's an example of that. Okay, having shown off the starting situation with Kórkyra, let's go ahead and start the mission, and prepare yourself because there is a lot to take in. Okay, so this is the Delian West, and every single mission in Hegemony will look like this. This is my bold new style of mission design called the wall design, where it is a grid of tasks that flow from top to bottom and have a super complicated web of interconnections as you go down. But it gets more complicated because each of these tasks also has tons of other requirements, including the completion of other tasks. So on top of the visual flow between each task, many of them require other tasks to be done in a scripting sense, and it always tells you that, which means it's actually even more interconnected and complicated than it looks at first. Now, the centerpiece of this entire mission for Kórkyra is their starting point, because all of the top row ones require it, which is an unusual alliance. Now, I'll quickly mention that every single mission in this entire tree, every single task in this entire mission, requires quote-unquote Kórkyra to be in the Delian League. This just means that Kórkyra is allied with Athenai. That's what that scripting requires. And an unusual alliance also requires Kórkyra to have 2 active navies, which just means that their ships are divided into 2 different navies, which is how it starts. So if you can see here, if I merge my starting ships, suddenly it shows that I need 2 navies, and I currently have 1, and to have 2 admirals, which means you have to actually have your navy at least split 54 and 1, because you start with 55 ships. So we'll do that in a moment. Now, on completion, this adds the national modifier in Unusual Alliance, which on a gameplay level adds -5 loyalty of characters, but it actually does much more than that, because this is the real centerpiece of this entire mission, the Unusual Alliance score system. An Unusual Alliance has a score between 1 and 9, and the score starts at 5. This score represents the Ecclesia's shifting position on Kórkyra's unusual alliance with Athenai. A lower score indicates stronger support for the current defensive Epimachos alliance. A higher score represents stronger support for an offensive and defensive Symmachos alliance. And then, when you complete this task, it adds decisions to increase or decrease the score. So what's going on here? Well, let's read the lore here to get some context. When we ended Centuries of Neutrality in 433 BCE to enter an alliance with Athenai, the agreement was reached only as a compromise. We became Epimachoi, defensive allies with no obligations to join one another in offensive wars, instead of Symmachoi, allies bound to fight together in offensive and defensive wars. Epimachos alliances are rare in Hellas, and by the way, Epimachos is the singular, Epimachoi just means plural. Epimachos alliances are rare in Hellas, and our ecclesia remains divided about what this unusual alliance means for Kórkyra's place in the Delian League. So, this is the central idea of the entire Delian West mission, is navigating Kórkyra's unusual alliance nature with Athenai. Now, the two sides of this are not be allied with Athenai or not be allied, because this is the Delian West. This is the pro-Delian, pro-Athenian historical mission for Kórkyra, and it's reflective of what they did during this phase of the war. And so having a set of tasks that lead you out of the alliance don't really fit in this mission. Rather, this is about trying to resolve an ongoing political debate about what the Epimachos alliance category or status means for Kórkyra's permanent place in the Delian League. Kórkyra has just joined the League fairly recently. Its people have this, as mentioned earlier, historical sort of culture of neutrality, and they joined the League only as a direct result of an incoming Corinthian naval invasion. So it wasn't really even that they felt it made a lot of sense for them, they just felt they had to do it. And it's put Kórkyra in a position where she is in this seemingly kind of half-measure relationship where, and even though in a gameplay sense she is just flat out allies with Athenai because the defensive alliance system from vanilla is being used for regional leagues, so you just have to kind of accept that this is a lore thing and not a literal gameplay thing. But the point is, the issue with the alliance is not about whether Kórkyra is bound offensively and defensively or just defensively. It's what it means for the Kórkyrians. Remember, Kórkyra is a democracy, right? This is an era of direct democracy. So the people of Kórkyra just comprise the democratic ecclesia that run the government. So an issue of reconciling Kórkyra's standing in the Delian League and her future in the Delian League, the disagreement about that and what the Epimachos alliance means for that is a political issue that is paralyzing the country. And this is bore out by my historical research. this was the main political debate in Kórkyra during this phase of the war. And in previous versions of the mission that I've shown off on the Discord from before, I focused more on the Democrat-oligarch conflict, which became a large part of Kórkyra later on in the war. But I've decided to have the oligarch stuff largely emerge kind of dynamically as a result of other things. And I'll talk about this more when I get to other parts of the Kórkyra missions that I've not made yet. But for the Delian West mission, I'm just going to ignore the oligarch stuff in the mission, as it will happen for Kórkyra based on triggered events that are based on other things, based on history. But the mission itself basically doesn't deal with the oligarch stuff at all, because it is dealing with your objectives as the democratic government of Kórkyra, trying to resolve your place in the League. As it's not clear to people, is Kórkyra going to be a permanent member of the Delian League going forward? Is this just a kind of alliance of opportunity, and then once the war's done, you go back to neutrality? People are disagreeing about this. So this decision, which I can actually, this task, which I can actually get by just quickly assigning some random admirals. Now I can select this, and I will go ahead and do just that. And you can see a bunch of other tasks have become available because I now have the requisite Unusual Alliance. I also now have the Unusual Alliance modifier in my national modifier list. Kórkyra is in an Epimachos alliance with Athenai, which only creates a defensive obligation between the two city-states. This compromise has left many Kórkyrians uncertain about Kórkyra's long-term standing in the Delian League. So you can see here that the tooltip notes that the score is currently 5. The title also has 5 in parentheses, so it's very clear what your current score is. This is the best way I could find, and it does work, by the way, I'll show you that. This is the best way I could find to actually have a score system like this in Imperator Rome, which doesn't really have a native sort of GUI elements that make this work, but I am able to do it, and I've been able to do it through kind of a scripting trick. So a bunch of decisions were just unlocked, and I'll quickly showcase a few of these. So we've got deliver a pro-Sumakos or pro-Epimachos speech to the Ecclesia. These are repeatable decisions that cost authority and increase the score directly, and the descriptions are pretty similar. As the Archon Eponymous, your open support of moving towards a Sumakos alliance or preserving the Epimachos alliance would sort of make a big effect in the Ecclesia. I'm not going to read through all the decision stuff, but you get the idea. There's also a few that are one-time that don't cost authority. So commissioning a Tragodia, which is a play about Kórkyra or about democracy, can reduce or increase the score respectively. Or promoting the cults of Kórkyra or Athena cost cult influence, or that you gain cult influence, but then you change the score. You might be wondering, why would you want to decrease the score? You'd think it's score, you want to increase it. The reason it starts off at 5 and can be between 1 and 9 is that the way this mission is laid out, you have to eventually decide to either reaffirm that you are going to be an Epimachos, a defensive ally of Athenai, which kind of carries a broader implication of not being a full sort of integrated member of the Delian League, but a kind of associate of the League. You're in the League, and you have all the same sort of League privileges and standing, but there's a kind of restrained autonomy that you are declaring, and you're making clear by not becoming a full normal ally of Athenai. And this requires, to click this, a score of 1. Or the inverse, you vote to become a Sumakos of Athenai and to renegotiate the alliance to become a full normal member of the League like any other ally or subject of Athenai, who are all Sumakoi. And you have to pick one of these, and they bypass one another, so you can't pick both. And you have to pick one of them to get through the rest of the mission. But what's interesting is that you only have to choose between one of these two. You actually need to and want to get various tasks that are earlier that require lower or higher score. And for example, economic autonomy and economic integration, which are kind of inverses of each other, each require lower or higher score. But you actually have to have both in order to get a lower down task that progresses towards the final one in the mission, which I'll talk about later. Which means even if you start your Delian West campaign thinking, I want to become a full Sumakos of Athenai, I'll talk about the reasons why you pick one or the other later, you don't actually just go straight there. You have to actually bounce between low and high score as you progress through the mission in order to get everything. And there's some strategy in planning out the route you take. So although you may look at everything before you start, like hit on pause and start playing, and you may decide, I know which kind of alliance I think makes more sense for me because they have different gameplay implications, you actually do need to plan out a route of score management to go from the start to where you want to get, with hitting all of the tasks you want along the way. As just increasing your score all the way or decreasing your score all the way will mean you have to then double back and get a lower or higher score later to get through the entire mission. So it's very much intended for you, even if you start thinking, I want for sure to resolve the debate in one specific way. Like in real history, where Kórkyra continued to have this debate for the entire period of when this mission is depicting, you basically exist within the kind of gridlock and kind of lean things one way, lean things the other way to achieve your other goals before you eventually finally lean things all the way in the direction that you want. So there's a lot of politicking going on with this entire thing. Now, to quickly show you the rest of the top row, you have approach the National and Delian bloc. Kórkyra's current Epimachos alliance has many supporters. Their coalition is quite diverse, including those who oppose the Delian League, those who specifically oppose Athenai, and those who support eventually returning to full neutrality. Some secret oligarchists are probably part of this faction as well. While our government certainly favors the Delian League and Athenai, it would be wise to hear them out. So this requires a score of 4 and gives you more decisions to decrease unusual alliance score by working with this voting block of the Ecclesia. Remember, Kórkyra's Ecclesia is running the country at some level as a democracy. And so convincing the faction of the Ecclesia who supports the current alliance for all these various reasons, really more so opposes getting a more developed alliance, allows you more ways to lower the score. Inversely, approach the Delian bloc. The ambition of developing Kórkyra's Epimachos alliance into a Sumakos alliance is the central platform of a powerful faction in our Ecclesia. These men consider our current Epimachos status to inhibit our future in the Delian League. While their loyalty to the Delian League may call their loyalty to Kórkyra into question for some, we must account for them. So again, this requires a score of 6 or higher, inverse of the other one, and it gives you more options to increase the score further. And by the way, this entire tree is generally quite symmetrical, with the middle of the tree dealing with the core mechanics as well as the naval recovery stuff, of which we'll talk about in a moment. The left side of the tree in the center deals with the Epimachos route, where you proceed to reaffirm your Epimachos status, which, by the way, is actually the most historical way to play this mission, as in real history, Kórkyra did actually vote to reaffirm their Epimachos status shortly before the first oligarchic coup. So this is the technically most historical route to play. But it is, of course, completely historically plausible that they could have gone the other way. There was strong internal pressure by the real-life Delian faction of Kórkyra to become a Sumakos, and the reason I've chosen to make the mission so focused on this is because, based on the history I've read, this is the most important thing happening in Kórkyra during this period in real history, which is what the historical missions are going to largely adapt and depict. And it's my job as the modder to ultimately make this political debate and political division an interesting kind of gameplay, which is why the score system is such a big part of the mission, as it really gamifies what could be kind of an abstract political argument between what kind of alliance we're in, well, while still being in an alliance. And so having said all that, let's move on to the other stuff on the top layer that's unlocked by getting an unusual alliance. The one on the far left is Fortify the Piraea. The cities of Kestria, Panormos, and Orikos make up our Piraea, our mainland holdings. The residents of these colonies are uncertain about Kórkyrian involvement in a distant war, having no hoplite of their own to defend themselves against the Epirotes. We must address their concerns before our levies depart the northern Ionian. So this one here is interesting because it actually is bypassed not by another mission, but by doing something another mission enables, which we'll talk about in a moment. But if you choose to do this, and if you have it bypassed, you just miss out on being able to do this, you spend 150 golds to get forts in your 3 Epirote colonies, Orikos, Panormos, and Kestria. Now, it's basically 50% discount, as 3 forts would normally cost 300 gold, and you get them instantly, but you are still spending money to get buildings that you may not actually really need. So that's why I've made this one sort of optional, where it's bypassed if you just go straight to the truces. Speaking of which, the Chaonian negotiations. The Chaonians are the Epirot tribes native to the region's northern coastline, which is also where we've settled our Perea. While this has stirred conflict over the centuries, it has also created opportunities for trade. This war requires our citizen soldiers far elsewhere, so we should attempt to secure agreements of non-aggression with the Chaonian tribes. This one requires you to be at peace with the 3 Epirot tribes of the Chaonia region, the Buthrotis, Phonicus, and the Amentis. And if you are at peace with them and have 6 authority available, you don't spend the authority, you have to have it available. You gain decisions to enter truces with the Chaonians, and in fact, here are those decisions. I'm not going to show every decision in the entire every decision or event in the entire mission, because I just don't have time, but just to show you that I've actually made them. Here they are with their various individual lore and world building. And the way this works with proposing non-aggression is it creates 10-year truces with these countries between Kórkyra and the country, and has an authority cost that is scaled based on the lore difficulty of actually interacting with this particular tribe. So continuing on here, on the other side of the top of the mission is Ambrachikos negotiations. The city-states of Astakos and Amphilochia have been caught in the middle of conflicts between Ambrachia and the Acarnanians before. However, with Acarnania now completely internally divided, they are likely under increased pressure to align with Ambrachia, which means joining the Peloponnesian League. We must prevent this. So if you don't know what anything I just said means, this deals with the right side of the mission, which is largely about depicting the historical Acarnania campaign at the start of the war. Now, there's a number of Western Hellenic campaigns and fronts, which in real history are attributed to largely being overseen by Athenai. But in the mod, for the sake of giving everyone content to do, I've decided it's a reasonable compromise to largely make Kórkyra take the lead on some of these campaigns, especially because Athenai will have plenty else to do and doesn't need to have 500 missions worth of content, just because Thucydides, who wrote our one main source about the war, was Athenian and only really knew what the Athenians were doing, or what they said they were doing. So I think it's reasonable to give some content that is around Kórkyra to Kórkyra from Athenai, and sort of present it like Kórkyra's taking point on this thing that in real history Athenai sort of did. But so one example of that, really 2 examples of that, are the war with Ambrachia, who is a Corinthian colony over here, and the war in Acarnania, which is a bit of a mess. Acarnania is divided between the Delian Acarnanians and the Peloponnesian Acarnanians, and the right side of Kórkyra's historical tree deals with getting involved in that conflict, and on the left side, sort of with the Epirot stuff, is dealing with Ambrachia. Now, having said all that, this mission deals with 2 sort of neutral countries that are in between these areas, Astakos and Amphilochia, who are neutral and aligned, and this is the first of a number of tasks throughout this mission, and actually many of the missions, which are dealing with diplomatic interactions, which is a big part of the Peloponnesian War and of the setting. With so many different city-states and everyone's allegiances kind of flipping and flopping all over the place, there's a lot of gameplay potential here for diplomatic interactions, bringing people into and out of factions through missions, and this is stuff that the scripting of this game can definitely make possible. So with Ambrachikos negotiations, you trigger an event to negotiate with these 2 countries, and you can basically achieve several different possible outcomes. They could enter truces with you, Kórkyra. They could join the Delian League as subjects of Athenai, or as subjects of Kórkyra, of you, and which they agree to do and how much they're willing to do it is based on a few factors that are listed there. Their opinion of Kórkyra, the number of ships in the Ambrachikos Gulf, which is this gulf over here, and the number of ships total. And then each option also has an effect on your unusual alliance score. So options that give things to Athenai or kind of reinforce the structure of the Delian League by making Athenai the overlord tend to increase the score because you're acting in the correct way from the Delian point of view, and your ecclesia considers it evidence that Kórkyra belongs in the Delian League and is sort of part of the Delian system. Doing things that benefit Kórkyra more directly lower the score, because it's seen as better for Kórkyra and its more pragmatic mindset as a Epimachoi ally of Athenai, as opposed to being a kind of normal Delian member. So that's how that event works. And then finally on the right here, Expedition to Acarnania. Acarnania is a region completely beset by the war that's broken out between the leagues, and without outside intervention, there's no guarantee that the Delian Acarnanians can win the day. With Athenai focused on Aegean campaigns right now, we must take the initiative and launch an expedition to reinforce the Delian Acarnanians. So this one requires a single unit or ship, really it should be more than that, to be in northern Acarnania, and this is, by the way, the kind of advanced scripting stuff that took me so long to figure out how to do. And this just requires you to basically bring some sort of forces, and really should bring over most of your forces to Acarnania to get involved in the conflict here, although just having people show up there lets you complete this to give your current leader some popularity, get some authority, and get some approval from the Stratocrat faction of your ecclesia. So I won't necessarily go through every single task in the entire mission in this much detail, but many of these tasks are sort of versions of these different kinds of tasks, just focused on whatever it needs to be for that point in the mission. For example, Align Ithaca, which requires the previous two, is very similar to the Ambracicos negotiation mission, where you enter negotiations with neutral Ithaca to try to bring them into the Delian League with different possible outcomes. And then Secure Acarnania requires occupation of the various Peloponnesian Acarnanians, and this actually has an equivalent over here with Capitulate Ambracia. This actually is hopefully a sign for a lot of you who are wondering how the war will work on a gameplay level when one peace deal would sort of end the war and kind of make the mod, a lot of the mechanics of the mod not make sense anymore. So essentially, the war of the Peloponnesian War in the mod will continue for a long time, and missions, decisions, and events will allow for occupied polises, occupied countries, to be diplomatically flipped out of their faction and into the occupier faction, such as in this way. So when these 4 Peloponnesian Acarnanians are under occupation, and it doesn't need to be by Kórkyra, it could be by anybody, but it assumes that it's going to be Kórkyra or the Delian Acarnanians who are doing the occupation. Then, with this mission, these countries are flipped out of Peloponnesian League, they join the Delian League as subjects of Athenai, and then an event is triggers where Kórkyra can make a bunch of possible choices, which all have unusual alliance and other resource implications like gold and authority, switching them from oligarchies to democracies. They make extra concessions to the Delian Acarnanians. You can kind of pause and read all the detail here, but what I'll do, just to get through the rest of this mission and not have this turn into an hour-long video, or get through the rest of this video, mission is the correct word, is I'm going to just kind of coast along all the other tasks and quickly explain what they are, and you can pause and read the full information. All of their tooltips, all of their interfaces, and all of the descriptions are completely done, so you can pause and read all of that at your heart's content. So recover from Sabota. This is in a line of tasks where you have to have a larger and larger navy with more and more individual navies and admirals. And this one here removes the national modifier Shattered at Sabota and adds decisions to allow you to either increase or decrease unusual alliance score. Some of the other tasks also do this, where they give you decisions that can go either way, because they aren't necessarily tied to you naturally going one or the other, but it's good to reward the player with those choices. And then Kórkyrian Thalassocrea adds a national modifier of the same name, which adds a minus 25% navy maintenance bonus. Then on left to right, economic autonomy, which I kind of alluded to earlier. This requires that lower score. It costs authority, and you gain the national modifier Syracussean trade. This represents, by the way, that at this point in the conflict, we're long before the famous Sicilian expedition, which was between Athenai fighting Syracuse. So at this point, Syracuse is not in the war yet, and Kórkyra is able to regain their trade relationship with them by making these reassurances of, hey, look, we're not an integrated Delian member, we're sticking with our special alliance, no need to worry. And the flip side over here is economic integration, which removes the Epidomnian embargo modifier. And I forgot to actually add, this one's meant to give you plutocrat approval. That's a mistake. But this one does give you democrat approval. And this does remove that negative modifier. Every time you finish an entire mission, all of the negative starting modifiers are all going to be removed, and a bunch of positive modifiers will have been added over the course of time. Now, over here, you do have the negotiations with the other regions of Epiros, with the Thesprotians of Thesprotis, and the Molosians of Molosia. And these work very similarly, where these add decisions, and then you have to spend authority to do the truces. Over here, I already talked about Align Ithaca and Secure Acarnania. Moving down, we actually have the choice between Epimachos and Sumakos. This one here, again, you have to have an unusual alliance score of 1 to do this at all. You also have to complete the task Peace with the Epirotes, which I'll talk about more in a moment. This costs 6 authority, and it adds the national modifier Epimachos of Athenai, which gives 25% 25 diplomatic reputation, 2.50% national unrest, and plus 0.25 monthly ambition, and will bypass the alternative over here, which gives 25% import and export value. For a comparison, by the way, because diplomatic reputation itself provides half of its value in import and export value, this one basically has half the commercial benefit, but it also has the unrest benefit, and this one is more commercial, to represent how closer ties to the Delian League does tend to have a better economic outcome, but it may have a worse kind of local stability outcome, which is kind of a kind of summary of the entire dynamic there. And then over here, Capitulate Ambracia, as mentioned before, requires that occupation of Ambracia with a similar decision you can make there about their fate. Peace with the Epirotes, when you are able to get this, you have to have all these truces at the same time. It refunds you all of the authority that you spent to get the truces, and you get some manpower, and you lose the manpower affecting Epirote Frontier Violence National Modifier. And again, you get those decisions to use this to gain or decrease unusual alliance score. Over here, redeploy to Naupactos, you have to have 50 of your ships docked in Naupactos, which gives you the supplied from Naupactos national modifier, extra naval range, and this kind of incentivizes you at this point in the mission, because you're sort of done up here, or I should say you're done over here with the Acarnania stuff, to largely start operating from Naupactos instead of from Kórkyra. Restore the Acarnanian League. This one's quite complicated, as at this point, all of the Peloponnesian Acarnanians in North Acarnania are defeated, and this allows you to, well, this automatically makes all of them enter a regional league with one another. They all enter alliances with Kórkyra, and they all also switch from subjects of Athenai to allies of Athenai. And then you, Kórkyra, gain the national modifier Liberator of Acarnania, diplomatic reputation plus 10, foreign culture happiness plus 5%, and national grandeur plus 0.05%. There's a few missions for several of the countries that do sort of similar things. This is something a lot of the Peloponnesian missions will involve, is freeing the Delian subjects and helping them form leagues. Regional leagues are a really big part of the sort of structure of the Hellenic geopolitics at this time, so this is something that Kórkyra could have conceivably played a role in overseeing. And this is a nice kind of final point of you came to Acarnania, you helped them resolve their big sort of civil war, and then you're restoring the league that reunifies all of them. And they're all becoming allies with you as well. Moving down to the next tier down, the central task here is our place in the Delian League. This requires Kórkyra and Thalassocratea and either of these two ones you pick between, but it also requires economic autonomy or integration, hence why you can't just skip over these. You have to get both of them in order to get this. And then you pick between one of the kinds of alliances. This removes Kórkyra neutrality. It also removes unusual alliance and removes all the unusual alliance decisions and mechanics. At this point in the mission, you've resolved Kórkyra's place in the league, hence why the text of the task says all this stuff. On the left and right side are total naval independence and Delian naval coordination. These essentially act as a chance to remove the malice from the previous modifier, where this allows you to get rid of that ambition malice from Epimachos, and this one gets rid of the monthly wages malice from Sumakos. And then Northern Ionian security just rewards authority. Give me just one moment here. This one just rewards authority. Same thing with this one over here. These are just rewards for finishing sort of that side of the entire mission. Align Molosia and Aetolian negotiations are the start of a series of completely ahistorical things at the bottom of the tree. The historical parts of the mission are sort of in a kind of like a triangle formation here, ending in triumph in the Delian West, which is sort of ahistorical, but the stuff on the left or right at the bottom is all it's either completely ahistorical or it's adapting things from history that don't necessarily happen right now or don't happen in this way, but make sense to put in the mission at this point. So Align Molosia is an example of this, where when you finish Northern Ionian Security, this sort of ahistorical extension has you actually bringing Molosia into the Delian League itself. And this is something, though it didn't necessarily happen this directly, Molosia did, during the course of the war, pivot from generally supporting Corinthos to having a more pro-Adynian position, although after the war, obviously, it didn't matter. So this is a kind of recreation of that through Kórkyra's mission here, because Kórkyra, with their historical mission, is interacting so much with Epiros. Then there's additional terms you can negotiate based on various modifiers. You can read all that. Over here, you've got Aetolian negotiations, which allows you to kind of do the truce creation with the Aetolian city-states, who are over here in the Aetolian region, which is mostly required to get to the really big prize over here on the right side, which is Kórkyrian Naupactos, where you have to have the two on the side that I'll talk about in a moment, but this allows you to negotiate the purchase of Naupactos from Athenai. You can read the text there on the screen by pausing it. On the right, establish the Aetolian League. You get rewarded for this one with money instead of manpower, and you get the authority repaid. And this, sort of similarly to the Acarnanian League, has you bringing the Aetolians together into a league that they did form in history, but later on you do it a little earlier in the timeline with this task. And again, they all join the Delian League, they all become Delian, they enter alliances with Kórkyra and Athenai, and they create a regional league with one another. Contest the Kiparisiakos, or Kiparisiakos, involves having 100 ships in these particular sea tiles in order to challenge Corinthian power over here. And this gives a ton of popularity, authority for your current ruler, and approval from the stratocrats. Over here, you've got a couple interesting ones. Democracy in Buthroton is based on a real historical event where the Epirot tribe of the Buthrotes underwent a democratic revolution during the Peloponnesian War, and their decision that I may have highlighted earlier notes that they actually have more economic and cultural ties with Kórkyra than many of the other Epirot tribes because of their location, but this allows you to basically recreate this in the campaign and bring them into the Delian League with a few different ways of doing it. And then lastly, in the mission is the stuff over in the bottom left, the Caraunia Compromise, and these are both based on what happened in Align Molosia. If Molosia just became a Delian ally, which is sort of the minimal thing that can happen here, or the easiest thing, that it doesn't have to happen, but it's the easiest thing that can happen here, this task has you declare war on Aulon, which is a city-state up here. It's not an Epirot tribe, but you basically are getting permission from Molosia through the Delian League to unify your Perea over here in Caraunia, where Aulon's sort of in the way. But because it's not an Epirot tribe, Molosia allows you to do this and basically gives you permission. And if you are more successful in Align Molosia and they become an ally of Athenai and of you, you can alternatively do the mutually exclusive Kórkyrian Chaonia, which is very, very complex. This one basically has you initiate a conference that Molosia and the Chaonians join, where you strong-arm Molosia into essentially allowing you to either directly take parts of or subjugate the Chaonian tribes, or you get to declare war immediately on them, breaking those truces that you set up earlier, to expand the Perea to be the entire region. Where this one is very dubious that Molosia would agree to this, but again, this is in a alt history direction at the end of this mission, where you've aligned Molosia and you're kind of taking advantage of them and of your peaceful recent history to get some military conquest. You can again pause and read all the text to get the context. But that wraps up the Delian West mission. Thank you so much for bearing with me. That was a lot of information, and I encourage you to pause and read all of the text as I sort of scrolled through everything. I didn't have time to read everything, but I put a lot of work into writing all of that lore, and there's a lot to unpack with Kórkyra's situation and the big picture of the Delian West. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all very soon for the next developer diary featuring the next Kórkyrian mission. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.